With hundreds of hours playing Forbidden West myself and an awesome community of fellow Horizon fans over on my Discord server and here on YouTube, I've been amassing a long list of combat tips since the game launched, and it's finally time to reveal all the best ones. This video is chock full of advanced tips and tricks you can use to take your gameplay to the next level. We'll start off with what I would consider the most useful ones that are applicable to almost any combat scenario, but then we'll dive into some really interesting and weird ones, some of which might be partially glitches, but they can be really powerful in the right situations, so you'll definitely want to check them out. Oh, and if you haven't already seen my previous video on secret combat mechanics, then you're going to want to check that out as soon as we're finished here. In that video, we covered things like quick draw, slide dodging, and knockdown, which are staple tactics all the best players use. But right now, we've got a bunch of new tips to cover, so let's go. First up, let me show you a way to reload advanced arrows almost instantly. Advanced arrows are some of the most powerful ammo in the game, but the animation for loading them is annoyingly slow, especially in the middle of combat. But there is actually a way to skip the reload animation completely. All you need to do is fire your advanced arrow, then hit L1 to quick swap to another weapon, and immediately hit L1 again to quick swap back, and the bow will be instantly loaded with another advanced arrow. If you don't already know, weapon quick swap is a setting you can turn on in the controls section, allowing you to instantly toggle between two weapons by tapping L1 instead of scrolling around the weapon wheel. You can set a default ammo type to switch to by selecting it in your weapon wheel and then hitting square, which will mark it with a small white dot. So set this up and then practice the instant arrow reload trick a bit outside of combat. It doesn't take too long to get the feel for it, and it's a super useful trick once you've got it down. On the theme of reloading, let's talk about reloading while sliding. Holding L2 while sliding, jumping, or riding a mount triggers the hidden quick draw mechanic, which is different from the weapon quick swap setting we just talked about. Quick draw is a useful mechanic on its own, but I think players typically only use it to fire weapons, not for reloading. It does work well for reloading though, because you can knock arrows while staying mobile. Remember, reloading requires you to hold L2 to aim, which limits your mobility, so reloading while sliding allows you to be more agile and get your reloading done while dodging attacks or repositioning, minimizing downtime in combat. So now that we know how to load our bows faster, let's talk about optimizing your shots. I highly recommend you consider using what I call concentration jumps. I started doing these early on in an effort to recreate the Hunter Reflexes skill we had in Zero Dawn. The quick draw mechanic has sort of taken over for Hunter Reflexes, but it doesn't give you nearly as much of a slow motion effect while jumping. To compensate for this, I trigger concentration while jumping, which makes it easier to aim and lets me take advantage of both concentration and agility damage coils or those perks built into weapons. Many weapons have either a concentration or agility damage perk, and some, like my favorite weapon, the Ancestors Return Shredder Gauntlet, have both. Agility and concentration perks and coils boost almost every damage type, including regular impact, tear, elemental buildup, explosive, and knockdown. Even for weapons that don't have built-in agility or concentration perks, you'll want to consider using agility or concentration coils because they're so versatile. And even without these coils, the concentration jump can still be useful because you'll be leveraging quick draw, which gives you a small aim assist boost even on ultra hard where aim assist is disabled. When first starting out with concentration jumps, I recommend pressing your right thumbstick to trigger concentration first, then draw your shot, and then jump and fire as the final step. You'll want to make sure you release your shot after the peak of the jump, since the agility boost only applies while you're falling, but by the time you've lined up your shot and are ready to fire, you'll almost definitely be on your way down anyway. Keep in mind you don't have to fire on your first jump if you don't get the angle you want. You can just let concentration roll and continue jumping until you get a good angle. As you get more comfortable, you may want to transition to doing the jump first, then aiming and drawing while in the air, and finally triggering concentration right before releasing your shot. The button sequence isn't too complicated for the beginner method, but it can still be tricky since you need to use your right thumb for both concentration and jump. If you find this difficult, consider remapping jump to L3 on your controller. Then, when you're aiming, you just need to press both thumbsticks down to jump and trigger concentration. Of course, this assumes you have the auto sprint setting turned on because L3 is normally used to toggle sprinting. Shout out to Lord of Entropy for sharing that tip with me. And keep in mind, if the concentration jump is too tricky for you, you can also trigger concentration while sliding to get the same benefits. By the way guys, if you enjoy these tips and tricks videos, leaving a like down below will let me know that, plus it really does help out the channel and would be much appreciated. Continuing on with optimizing your damage output, many of us tend to overdraw pretty much every shot. This isn't a bad habit to have because overdrawing is basically a free damage boost, but it does cost a bit of extra time, which is sometimes better used elsewhere. Keep in mind your mobility is also limited while drawing, so knowing when you don't need to overdraw and being comfortable abandoning an overdraw or a shot altogether are good skills to have. However, you should also know that there are damage penalties for not drawing hunter or sharp shot bows enough. On a hunter bow, you need the reticle to close about halfway to get full damage. Tap firing or even releasing a little too early will result result in a 50% damage reduction. To ensure you get full damage with a sharpshot bow, you need to draw all the way until you see the overdraw halo appear around the outside of the reticle. Releasing a shot before that point reduces damage by 50%. But even with these damage penalties in mind, sometimes it's still better to partially draw. I think the best example of this is when you're applying elemental states. If the status indicator is almost full, there's no reason to wait for a full overdraw when a much quicker shot with a partially drawn or even tap-fired arrow will get it done. You don't need to triple or double notch every shot either. You might be wasting resources if you don't need multiple arrows, plus the extra reloading can cost even more time. Although that can be minimized somewhat if you master the reloading tricks we discussed earlier. But I'm sure I'm not the only one who's taken a big hit because I was trying to sneak in a triple-notched overdrawn shot while a machine was in the middle of an attack animation. Don't get me wrong, it's definitely fun to pull off a shot like that, but most of the time it's smarter to cut your losses and let the partially drawn shot fly so you have time to dodge out of the way. Speaking of dodging, I've mentioned this in lots of other videos, but it's worth reiterating that you should definitely be using the slide mechanic to dodge in addition to using normal dodges. Sliding is faster, covers more ground, and even has a few more invincibility frames compared to a regular dodge, so the slide dodge is often much more effective. If you want to learn more about the slide dodge and exactly how to do it, check out my secret combat mechanics video, which will be on screen at the end of this one. We all get knocked down at some point during combat though, and when that happens, Aloy has a pretty long stun animation that prevents you from moving or firing shots while she's getting up. Instead of just waiting for it to end, you can use this time productively to craft ammo or items in your toolkit. You'll often need to craft more ammo at some point during a fight anyway, so why not do it while you can't do anything else? Of course, you can also use this time to heal by hitting up on your D-pad or refill your medicine pouch by holding up. If you're really quick, you can even craft potions and smoke bombs while you're down too. Speaking of which, I think a lot of players are still sleeping on smoke bombs because until patch 1.17, one smoke bomb wasn't powerful enough to stun large machines on very hard or ultra hard. But now, a single smoke bomb will stun any machine on any difficulty, so you should definitely have them ready to go in your toolkit. Smoke bombs are super useful for getting a break in combat to reposition, drink a potion, heal and refill your medicine pouch, or even craft ammo and traps. There's also a nice trick to carry more than the standard 6. All you need to do is equip the +2 smoke bomb capacity weave from the Nora Tracker outfit, or equip one of the outfits with this perk built in, like the Utaro Winter Weave or Gravesinger. Assuming you already have the smoke bomb capacity skill as well, you'll be able to craft 12 smoke bombs, and after switching back to your main outfit, they'll still be there. Another useful trick with smoke bombs is that you can use them to force shell snappers to resurface from burrowing underground. This works as of patch 1.18, but it may be a glitch because for some reason the same trick doesn't work on burrowers or rockbreakers. A trick that does work on rockbreakers though is luring them with an arrow or rock. While they're underground, if you're not too close, you can bait them by firing arrows at the ground or throwing rocks at a spot far away from you to make them resurface near that location. This is a pretty good tactic for getting them positioned to remove their front claws. I've got a trick for slaughter spines too. One of the most frustrating things with slaughter spines are their powerful plasma attacks. If it doesn't kill you outright, then the plasma blast explosion that happens after 12 seconds can still do some serious damage. Not to mention it will immobilize Aloy briefly while she's knocked down. However, if you can get the timing down just right, it's possible to leverage the invincibility frames of a dodge roll or slide to avoid taking damage from the blast. To do this, wait until the timer runs out on the plasma state icon, but don't dodge quite yet. Instead, you want to listen for the blast's charging audio cue to end and then dodge right after that. If done successfully, the blast will still knock Aloy down, but you won't take any damage. Here's an example. This definitely takes some practice, so if you want to master it, I'd suggest using a plasma weapon like the Glow Blast Strikethrough or Glow Blast Tripcaster to apply the plasma blast state to yourself, then practice the dodge and slide timing. If you don't like this method, then another trick is to submerge Aloy in water to wash the plasma off. You have to get to the point where you're swimming though, which can be pretty dangerous around a slaughter spine. A slightly less dangerous trick is to purposely drench Aloy in purge water using something like purge water bombs on the corrosive blast sling to remove the plasma blast state, but being drenched prevents Aloy from dealing elemental damage. These are all pretty clever tricks, but in the end, I still think it's the smartest move to just carry some cleansing potions at all times to instantly remove the plasma blast state or any other afflicted state. Remember those smoke bombs to create an opportunity for yourself to drink one or even craft one if needed. Now let's switch gears and talk about a few weapon techniques. If you've seen my video on the best weapon techniques, then you know I recommended using Brace Shot on your Sharpshot bow. However, the New Game Plus update in June nerfed Brace Shot pretty hard, so now I recommend using Focus Shot on your Sharpshot sharpshot bow instead. If you're a spike thrower fan, then you should know about a trick with the spike trap weapon technique. Even though this technique was intended to be used to set traps on the ground, it's actually more effective to simply target machines with it directly. The damage is much higher than a normal spike throw, plus you get the trajectory highlighted, making it easier to aim. We dive into more depth on that and the other spike thrower weapon techniques in my spike thrower masterclass video linked below. Of course, we couldn't get through this video without some tips on my favorite weapon category, shredder gauntlets. I didn't talk it up very much in my masterclass video, but the power shredder weapon technique is actually very useful for component removal. It yields a similar explosion to what you get on your fourth throw if you're catching your shredders correctly, and just like normal shredder explosions, it deals a large amount of tear damage. But the benefit with power shredder is you get the powerful explosion immediately. I showed how this can be useful for harvesting difficult machine components in my Dreadwing hunting guide, and it's useful on other machines as well. Another tip is that you can instantly charge up a shredder throw if you press L2 and R2 at the exact moment you catch it. This is especially useful on lower rarity shredders that take a longer time to charge up. Also keep in mind that you can craft more shredder ammo while you have an active shredder in the air. Aloy will automatically catch the disc when it comes back, even if you have the weapon wheel open, so if you're running low on shredders mid-fight, this can be a nice way to refill your ammo without breaking the flow of combat. Shredders are also going to take us in the realm of the stranger and more interesting tricks, and before diving in, I want to give credit to Horizon Maniacs for sharing many of these. As far as I can tell, they discovered and were the first to post videos on a lot of these strange combat mechanics, so thank you Horizon Maniacs for bringing these crazy tricks to the community. Like me, you might have actually experienced this first one accidentally. I often use shock shredders on Tide Rippers, and I noticed that sometimes my shredders seem to disappear into the machine and continue dealing damage over time long past the 3 ticks they're supposed to. Well, what's actually going on here is the shredder discs are hitting the water surface and start floating. They'll float for about 10 seconds, and they'll deal damage over time to any enemy that gets close to them. Stacking a bunch of shredders in shallow water with the triple shredder weapon technique and then baiting a machine into them can actually be incredibly powerful. Tide Rippers are a prime target, but this can work against any machine that's standing in water. It works on dry land too, but it's much trickier because the shredders don't stop where they initially hit the ground like they do in water. Instead, they launch back towards where they were thrown from before finally coming to rest. To get them to land near a machine during a fight on land, you either need to throw them at the ground a little ways behind the machine, or you have to turn around and throw them at the ground just in front of yourself to make them launch backwards towards the target. When the terrain allows, you can throw them into vertical features like buildings, trees, or cliffs, and they'll pretty much drop straight down, so that's a little bit easier, but overall this strange behavior is pretty hard to leverage on dry ground. Now, this is clearly not the intended behavior for shredders, so it could definitely be patched out at some point. At the moment, it works on patch 1.18, so have fun with it while it's around. There's another trick that relies on an interaction of ammo with water, specifically shallow water. If you use the high volley weapon technique on a hunter bow, you can launch regular or advanced hunter arrows into shallow water and they'll get caught in a sort of limbo state, where they're motionless but can still deal damage. It's pretty weird, and it won't work if the water is too shallow or too deep, but if you can set up enough of them with repeated high volleys, similar to the floating shredders, you can use this as a kind of super overpowered trap. You'll know you've done it correctly when the water is splashing around the arrows. Just be aware that Aloy can take damage from these as well. Tripcasters are another weapon with some interesting and powerful exploits. If you fire tripwires directly at a machine, as opposed to into the ground like you're supposed to, they don't deal any damage, so the machine is never alerted to your presence if you're in stealth. On its own, this is pretty insignificant, but it gets really interesting when you load up the Tripcaster with instant elemental coils, like Instant Brittle for example. Even though the tripwire doesn't deal impact damage, each hit does have a chance to trigger the instant coils, so you can freeze a machine or apply any other instant state without it ever becoming alert. And because you're not actually setting the tripwire up, you don't use any ammo while doing this, so you can use this as a free method of applying elemental states while remaining undetected. Stagger beams, explosive, shield, or elemental wires will all work for this trick, but with elemental wires you'll want the type to match the coils you're using. Of course, you can use this when machines are alerted to your presence too, but when you use it in stealth and combine it with our next trick, we might just have the ultimate stealth tactic. Again, I'm not sure if this is a glitch or not, but Strikethrough precision arrows found on the Piercing and Delta Sharpshot bows and Regala's Wrath won't actually alert a machine to your presence. This doesn't work on human enemies, but you can repeatedly deal damage to a machine with Strikethrough arrows while maintaining stealth. Equip stealth coils to the Sharpshot bow and use the Tripcaster Tripcaster instant brittle trick to freeze the target without detection first, and this becomes an incredibly strong tactic that allows you to take down machines very easily. You'll have to be hiding in tall grass or using some other type of cover, but that's fairly easy to come by. Alright guys, those are all the advanced and interesting combat tips and tricks I've collected so far in Forbidden West. The first ones we discussed, like the instant advanced arrow reload, are super useful, so you'll definitely want to try them out. The weird glitchy ones can be really strong too, and they currently work on 1.18, but keep in mind they could be patched in a future update. Also remember to go check out my secret combat mechanics video linked on screen to learn more about quick draw, slide dodging, knockdown, and much more. If you enjoyed this video or learned something new, then leaving a like would be much appreciated. And totally leave me a comment if you have a tip or trick we didn't cover. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.